dungeons. And then in Gory Island Synagogue, you actually had a dungeon, still there, you can go and see it. I took this picture, for children, for infants. So you're captured, you're marched to the coast. I understand that most of the Africans who died as a result of enslavement died from the time they were captured and marched to the coast, before they got to the dungeons, before they were put on the ships, before they got to the Americas. You can imagine the trauma of being captured, shackled and chained and marched for hundreds of miles in some cases, or kilometers. And the men, the women, and children would be separated. The men would be put in a dark hole, no toilets, no air conditioning, no soft beds, branded, beaten, bruised, in doubt as to what's going to happen to you. No knowledge of what happened to your family. And then the women in the women's dungeon. I don't think I have to talk very much to get you to use your imagination, to think about the things those women were subjected to, those captured African women in those dungeons. And then the infant's dungeon. Now I have a 10-year-old child, one daughter, one child, she's 10. I became a father kicking and screaming late in life. And now my daughter is my prize. I adore my child. Now think about that. That in the distance, you're in the men's dungeon or the women's dungeon, and you hear your child calling you, "Daddy, Mama, where are you? I'm afraid. Come and get me. I'm hungry, I'm afraid, I'm cold. Where are you?" And this went on for hundreds of years. How could people be so cruel as to enslave a whole group of people, even enslave their children, and call themselves human beings? And this went on for, and the Dutch and the Danes were involved in that process. Am I right?
Big time. Big time.
This went on for hundreds of years. Can you imagine the level of insanity that came as a result of that? And then, of course, the Africans, after being branded with hot irons, were packed away on these ships, these floating coffins, layers of them. Let's suppose you have a ship and you have maybe 6 layers, and each layer would be like you had about this much space, and about this much space. So if you're a big brother like this brother right here, you have a problem. And this voyage went on for several weeks. No toilets, no air conditioning. Imagine the feces. Imagine the stench from the urine. Imagine the blood from your menstrual cycles. Imagine the rats. And imagine 6 layers like that on top of each other. Imagine what it would be like to be on the bottom of that for 6 weeks or 3 months. Imagine that. Now that's what my ancestors endured. All right. And then this is an example of an enslaved African woman in Brazil. Her name was Anastasia. I don't know what part of Africa she came from. Or I should say what part of Africa she was taken from, because they didn't come voluntarily. And the slave master wanted to have sex with her, and she refused. So as a form of punishment, he had an iron mask strapped to her face that she wore until she died, until it rusted. Now in Brazil, she has become a kind of a saint. And so what we say is, you don't have the right to be silent. The least you can do is speak out against injustice. Now, a lot of times I hear people say, I ain't no African, and I don't owe Africa anything because those Africans sold us. Now, I can dispute that. But many people readily believe that. You haven't done any research, you just heard it. And you go around repeating it. Well, one thing we do know is that there were Africans who fought against enslavement. Now that is indisputable. And it seems to me that those Africans should get at least equal time. Africans who attacked those dungeons, Africans who revolted on the ships, and Africans who resisted in Africa itself. This is an example of one such person. Her name is Nzinga. She comes from Angola. And let me just show you images that we don't see in the United States, images of African royalty. from Congo, Emperor Menelik II, Emperor of Ethiopia, who defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. The Asante, one of the Asantehinis of Ghana, king of the Asante. Look at that gold. And all these images are from Nigeria. This is from an exhibit in London a couple years ago on Nigerian royalty. I think most of them are from the north. Now this brother, the Une of Ife, I knew him personally. I didn't know him well. We sat at a conference together, he and I, right here. I didn't know who he was. I saw these people coming up paying him respect, and I said to myself, who could this brother be? And we just kick it in like we're talking about who won the football game. And later on, I found out who he actually was. He's an ancestor now. So we don't see these images very much in the United States. And then the natural beauty of Africa. Mosi Otunya, Victoria Falls, at the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe. And the Nile River. It's been said, if you want to understand Africa's history, you must understand the rivers, the navigational system, the highways. The Nile is the longest river in the world. And the Niger River, or Niger if you like, I've been able to sail on both of those. And the Congo River. And the Northern Highway, the Sahara. Now I used to take groups to Morocco. I hope to take another group there soon. And what we would do is we would get there before dark and we'd set up a tent and we'd sleep outside. And the stars would be so bright and tell stories and drink wine, okay, and other things. And the stars would be so bright it would be like you could just pluck them out of the sky. And then in the morning we would get a string of camels and ride to the top of these dunes and I'd give a lecture. Now, before we take our first break, let me see if I can move it along some and just do what I'm pretty good at, and that is show you images of African people in parts of the world that you don't always expect Africans to be. Let's first go to Asia. We're going to start in Africa. Here's my book on Asia. One of my books, I've written I think 7 books on Asia. Here's the latest one, African Star Over Asia, the Black Presence in the East. I do have one of them left. Again, I've been told you all are rich, so you can buy one, and I'll even raise the price. African Star, the African Star of Asia, the Black Presence. This is what the first people in Asia looked like who came out of Africa. Africa is the mother continent. There's only one race, and that's the human race, which began in Africa. So get comfortable with that. This brother is from a community called the Jarawa. And then, of course, Dr. Mansurda, my great teacher, would say, Runoko, it's one thing to say that you were first, but let's spend some time talking about what we did. This is a black man from ancient Iraq, and they developed a civilization called the Sumerian civilization from ancient Iran, and a person from Judea. And the tomb of the great African Muslim Bilal, one of many great African Muslims. Islam and Africa have a close connection. In the early days of Islam, when things were not going well in Mecca, Muhammad was advised, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was advised to send his closest companions to Ethiopia, across the Red Sea. He was told, if you look to Ethiopia, there you will find a land of righteousness ruled by a king under whom no man is persecuted. And early Muslims went there. When they went back to Arabia, when things were more stable, the Prophet Muhammad is supposed to have said, he who brings an Ethiopian man or an Ethiopian woman into his house brings the blessings of God there. Bilal is a great African Muslim, so much so that he's called a third of the faith of Islam. This is his tomb that I photographed in Damascus, Syria. I hope it's still there, considering what's going on in Syria today. Another black man in pre-Islamic Arabia. This brother is Antara ibn Shaddad, Antara the Lion, a dashing knight and a poet who led troops into battle and wrote flourishing, love poems to his wife. A brother from early Iran, an African soldier in early Iran, in the Persian army fighting the Greeks. And what about black people in these parts of the world today? Here is a former crown prince of Kuwait, and they all look like people that I know. This brother, for example, looks like the African-American comedian Richard Pryor. From Oman, Israel, these are the Beta Israel, also known as Falasha, who have been taken from Ethiopia to Israel. A Beta Israel sister, a sister from Palestine. You don't see these people on TV very much. Myself with a group of sisters in Turkey doing research. I went to Turkey looking for black folk. This is 2004. I was told there were no black people in Turkey. I said, okay, give me some Africans then.
Where in Turkey?
No Africans here. Near Ishmael, actually near the coast of Kusadasi, a place called Tigray. And I was able to meet these sisters and we just bonded. They're originally from Sudan. And they were taken to Turkey during the time of the Ottoman Empire. And we got real tight. Now, I'm not a Muslim. So it says a lot for them, these sisters to embrace me, a complete stranger, but a black man and a non-Muslim. And I interviewed them all day. And one of them finally said, look, you remind me of all of our husbands are dead. And one of them said, you remind me of my dead husband, and came and started stroking him. I said, I think we better wind this interview down real quick. From Oman, Yemen, the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, an African Iraqi police officer, one of my colleagues in Abu Dhabi and one of my students in Turkey, myself with an African Palestinian in Jordan. We talked, I did an interview with him. He says, Runoko, we don't have any racism in Jordan. Naturally, I don't believe him because I grew up in the United States. And it's hard for me to believe any place is devoid of racism, even Denmark. He says, oh, no, we don't do that here. He says, in fact, I've only been called a nigger once. He says, I was in a gas station in Miami, Florida. A little Bedouin boy tried to take me to the top of a mountain to view a tomb on this little bitty donkey. And every time I tell the story, the donkey gets smaller and smaller. It was a rough ride. Palestine. African Palestinians in a refugee camp in Ramallah. A sister from Oman, another African Palestinian, and President Barack Obama, Shimon Peres, and this was Miss Israel at the time, very fine sister. And I'm sure Michelle Obama had a word or two to share with the brother that night. If they have couches in the White House, he probably occupied one that night, because it looks like the brother's having too much fun. Let's move to South Asia. This is what the first people of South Asia look like, natural blonde. She's from a community called the Onje. This sister's from ancient Pakistan, India, 4,000 years old. Now just look at that attitude. Look at all those bracelets, but more than that, look at that hand on her hip. I don't know if sisters do that in Denmark, but they do it in the United States. An early example of the Buddha from ancient Afghanistan. A black king in medieval India named Malik Akbar, kind of like a king anyway. And many of the black people in India today, or in recent times, this is how I got started collecting these photographs. Let me show you some of these black and whites from South India. Well, this is the kind of hair that people be using for those weaves, because they have naturally straight hair there. When I went to India, I've been to India 3 times, and people would come to me, I had hair at that time, and they would come and they'd say, Dr. Rashidi, you have such good hair. I wish my hair was like yours. I said, if you came to the United States, you'd have a heart attack because of our issues about hair. Sisters seem to think, and brothers too, that beauty is long, straight hair. And so we drain resources from our community to buy these weaves and wigs. And it says a lot about what our standard of beauty is. And you and I both know that it's not just in the United States. It's even more in Africa itself. All right. Off India, I showed these before. Let me show you some color ones. There I am. From the Punjab. These are the people called the Dalits or the Untouchables. There are more black people in India than Nigeria. Now, whether you see them as black or they see themselves as black, we can talk about. But just in terms of sheer numbers, this is one of my favorite pictures, Runoko the anthropologist. It's not often I get to look down on top of people's heads. It's a good feeling. She looks like she could be from Somalia, Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa. Am I right or wrong? This is almost a perfect picture of my mother, except for the earlobes. My mother's an ancestor now. That's what she looked like. You can see how beaten down a lot of these people are, even the look. At the time, this was the blackest person I'd ever seen in my life. We're in East India. I stared at this brother for a solid 15 minutes, couldn't take my eyes off of him. Now he stared at me too, now I don't know what he was thinking about. I'm thinking to myself, damn, that brother's black! I've been told this is Photoshop. I can look at that nose. James Brown. Samuel L. Jackson. Look, they honored me. They put all these things on me. I gave a speech. Another one. And with the Carol O'Donnell Panthers in India, they named themselves after the Black Panthers. Look at these people. Look. Look at those ears. Barack Obama ears. From Nepal, and these are all brothers and sisters from Pakistan. Some are there as a result of enslavement, others are the first people who ever came there. Bangladesh, from Sri Lanka. Tell me, this person does Oprah Winfrey, I'm telling you. I ought to send this to Oprah, she might have me on her show. And then you can say, I knew Runoko when he came to Copenhagen. Now he's hanging out with Oprah. Let's look at Southeast Asia. This is from Cambodia. And these are all ancient images. Look at this one. Now I'm told that the reason the Buddha's head is like that because of little snails on top of his head. So are these little snails on top of this sister's head too? I don't think so. This is my first book translated into French. Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Vietnam, and this is a brother in Vietnam in recent times. He's like the people you were talking about. Cambodia, Malaysia, Philippines. One of my students doing field research in Malaysia, all from the Philippines, China. This is from the Shang Dynasty. You see a bronze libation vessel holding a small black man. Central China, a Buddha. A brother in China giving the Black Power salute during the Tang Dynasty. No, I'm sure he wasn't doing that, but you never know. China. From Japan. A sister of mixed heritage in China today. Let me do one more section and then maybe we should take a pause. All right, let's just look briefly at Australia. Now these are the indigenous people of Australia, sometimes called Australian Aborigines or the indigenous people of Australia. And this is one of my favorite photographs. I took this picture at a place called Palm Island. And here I am in Australia looking real cool, I thought. Rastafari, brother in Australia. These are the original people. And they've been treated very, very, very poorly. In Australia with two sisters after giving a speech. Looks like my daughter. Aboriginal Australian elders. Tall Australians. Here's a map of Australia and the Pacific. This is Truganini. She's a Tasmanian Aboriginal. And most of our people were wiped out. From a place called Bathurst Island, a place called the Torres Straits, Indonesia. A sister from Vanuatu, to me, she has a striking resemblance to Beyonce, with clothes on. I love Beyonce, but sometimes I want to say, sister, cover it up a little bit. leave something to the imagination. I hate to see a black woman who has to exploit her sexuality. Isn't there more to black women than sexuality? What about their intellect? What about their majesty, their strength, their genius? Or for that matter, no woman should have to have their sexuality exploited. If we are against racism, and I hope we are, we should also be against the exploitation of women. We should be against gender violence. We should be against domestic violence. We should be against the abuse of the environment. I'm talking about a holistic approach. So it's not enough just to be anti-racism. We must attempt to destroy all of these evils that we confront. All right. Off from the South Pacific now, then we're going to take a break. A brother from New Guinea. These children from the Solomon Islands. Natural blondes, black people are the first blondes. Yeah, 30,000 years ago. Buka Island, Bougainville Island. I took these pictures myself now. There's a brother with a 50-cent t-shirt on. Now 50 cents is claiming he doesn't have any money now. He doesn't have any cents. From Fiji. And this sister from Fiji. Now I met her on my first trip to Fiji in the South Pacific and I fell in love. Took about 1 minute. So, you know, be careful when you come up to me, okay? The sisters, the brothers don't have to worry, right? So, one of the things I like about Fiji, believe me, you don't have to worry. One of the things I like about Fiji is that all these black people say they come from Africa. And it's a big deal to them. They come up to you and say, we from Africa, where are you from? And if you say you're from Africa, you've got a friend for life. And then they say, have you been to Africa? And if you say, yeah, they'll never leave you alone. They want to hear all about it. In fact, specifically, they say they come from one of two places, either Tanganyika, which is mainland Tanzania, or South Africa, or perhaps Egypt. So she is a tour guide in a village where they landed when they first came to Fiji. That's what they believe. So I thought I was going to do a private tour of this village. But as it turned out, I was with a group of people and I was the only black person in the group. And these people were not very friendly. So we get to this village and I'm with all these white folks and the sister looks everybody up and down and says, you know, we come from Africa. We're an African people and we speak an African language. And then she paused for effect. I think she might have been joking and she said, and we used to eat a lot of white people. But when people started to get uncomfortable, she said, we used to eat a lot of white people, but she said the meat was so bad that it made us throw up and vomit and we had to stop. I said, sister, I'm hard of hearing. Can you say that just one more time? I knew that was the woman for me, but she was married and I let it go. But I still think about it. Maybe we should have ate some more. We didn't have this problem. Now look here, look at these blondes. I took this picture in Fiji. And there's a little interesting story about it. What happened was, I'm leading a group of people and somebody said, Dr. Rashidi, I gotta go to the toilet. So we had to stop the bus and look for a place to stop. So everybody got off the bus, about 20 people, I'm the tour leader. One group got off to pee, another group got off to have a beer, another group got off to stretch their legs, another group got off, smoked cigarette. Everybody's off the bus. And all at once, these people started coming out of their houses. They see us, we're black, they're black. And they said, where are you from? We said, we from Africa. A group of African Americans. We proud of ourselves. We from Africa. And they said, we from Africa too. So it was like a party. And all at once, this little child came out and everybody stopped what they were doing and gathered around this little child. What did we say? You so cute. You so pretty. Here's some candy. Last thing this kid needs is a bunch of rotten teeth. Here's some candy. Here's $1. Can I take your picture? Finally, the bus driver said, I had enough. I don't care where you're from. We got to go. We get on the bus, and the youngest person comes up to me and says, Dr. Rashidi, what kind of message did we just send those people? And the implication was clear that if you are lighter than the rest, if you are blonder than the rest, you are somehow better, more attractive than the rest. And I was just stunned. because that's not why I was drawn to that child, or was it? As an anthropologist, the child just looks so different. But are we so programmed to think that if you are light, you are better? Is it so deeply ingrained in our psyche that we are instinctively drawn to that? In the United States, we have what's called, we have several expressions. We have one, if you're white, you're right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. We have what's called the white dog test. In the United States in 1954, the year I was born, we were given a choice. There was a test. And a bunch of black children were given a choice. Do you want a white dog to play with or a black dog to play with? Almost all of the children, the black children, selected the white dog. And they were asked why, because the white dog is pretty. Now these are black children now. They rejected the black dog. Now about 3 years ago, the same test was repeated and the results were exactly the same. Are we just programmed to be anti-African? To not like ourselves without even thinking, just instinctively? And that's what these things do. That's what travel does for me. It's an education. And a lot of times what you see is yourself. And what that self is not always attractive. All right, let me move on. East New Britain, New Caledonia, more. The Solomon Islands. Look at this kid making a face for the camera back here.
Excuse me, Dr. Runoko.
A mean looking little boy. Just, if you can, we'll just hold it. I'm going to take a break in a moment. Mean looking little kid. And there's that same mean looking little boy. I wanted to say, do you need a hug or something? But I was afraid. All from the South Pacific, Fiji. A friend of mine from West Papua. He's going to be the head of state of West Papua if it ever becomes independent. Who looks a heck of a lot like LeBron James right here. You can see the similarity. Looks like Miles Davis. Looks like Dizzy Gillespie. Looks like Bill Cosby. All from the South Pacific, Micronesia now, New Zealand, Hawaii, King of Hawaii, and this takes us to Europe. I have 2 more chapters. We're going to do Europe and we're going to do the Americas, and then we can have some discussion. But right now, let's try to take a 10-minute break, all right?